Hello, my name is S.K. Williams, and I welcome you to the Bishop's Bible Project. This project is primarily an audiobook. The goal is to read the entire Bishop's Bible of 1568, including the Apocrypha and certain supplemental materials, all presented for your consideration. However, this project does accompany the audio with a video presentation. The video presentation is a whimsical animation created using a now out-of-date animated software, Crazy Talk Animator. And when I speak of Crazy Talk Animator, I mean Crazy Talk Animators 1, 2, and 3. The project is broken into 3 parts. There will be the Old Testament, the Apocrypha, and the New Testament. For the Old Testament, I will be animating the videos using Crazy Talk Animator, the original. Henceforth, I shall call it Crazy Talk Animator 1 to make it an easier distinction. The Apocrypha shall be animated using Crazy Talk Animator 2, and I shall use Crazy Talk Animator 3 for the New Testament. This will allow for a slight visual cue to aid with assisting in the distinctions between the 3 parts. I shall also change the background of the video, which I will explain later. And there will be other subtle visual cues that I'm not going to discuss now, that I'm simply going to let the viewer discover, and we'll discuss when I wrap up the project. But as to why I'm accompanying this project with video, there's more than one reason, and it's complex. The history of this project is complex, more so than you would expect, and probably needlessly so. But it is what it is. And in some ways, it mirrors the complexity of the history of the Bishop's Bible itself. A Bible that was and has been underappreciated throughout history. Indeed, when I began this project, no one had ever done an audio version of the Bishop's Bible. All other major historical Bible translations have an audio version of them, but not the Bishop's Bible. So, I have elected to do so, with the intent of presenting it for historical consideration. As such, I will be reading the text in an attempt to approximate the older pronunciations of certain words, which will have strong French or German influence. For instance, I will often not say covenant, I will say covenant. I will often not say ordinance, I will say ordinance. Although I did overemphasize them earlier in the recordings, and I will try and make them sound at least more natural going forward. But the primary reason for this audiobook is not simply to have another audio Bible. Those aren't necessary, since there are many of them, many fine and excellent ones, possibly better than anything I can produce, and of Bibles that people are more familiar with and more likely to turn to. Don't misunderstand me. If anyone wishes to use my Bible as a devotional, or simply as a way for them to have scripture read to them, perhaps if they have visual problems, or perhaps they like listening to the Bible while working, I don't object to that use at all. But the primary focus of this work is to preserve history. A history that will be discussed in greater detail in the third and final introduction. But for now, simply realize that the stated goal of this project is to preserve a historical Bible, and it is predominantly a historical effort. But that still begs the question. If my goal was to create an audio Bible, why set it to videos? And if set to videos, why set it to animated videos? After all, the animation, if you look at this project, shows an animated bishop who actually reads the text, whilst a bearded man with glowing red eyes stands next to him. And a circular symbol with an abstract bird is there. And at least in the early part of the project, that would be known to anyone. You will notice the exterior of a church, specifically Westminster Abbey, behind them. Why did I do this? Well, it's rather simple. Even though YouTube now allows one to load audio files without video, when I began this project several years ago, that wasn't the case. I needed to have it in video format. Of course, that video could have been anything. I could have simply chosen a black panel and had that throughout all of them, with no actual visuals at all, or perhaps a nice pastel church or paintings of various biblical scenes. But I chose animation. And what's more, for the most part, I am not animating the actual biblical stories. I am animating a cartoon bishop reading the text of the Bible. To explain this, you have to understand that the Bishop's Bible Project, while now very important to me, I've grown to love it deeply, began rather haphazardly. You see, a lot of it is just serendipity. I acquired a used copy of Crazy Talk Animator on disk, the sort that you would load into a computer manually. I then began some crude animations, realizing I wasn't very good and not likely to improve radically since it was only ever a distraction, a bit of a hobby while doing other things. I decided to practice my animation by overlaying it with commentary. So I created a cartoon version of myself. This may sound narcissistic, unfortunately, but it's not intended to be. I simply wanted to be honest that I'm the one speaking, while, of course, doing so as a cartoon character, animating using this software. And at the time, I had been studying the history of English translations of the Holy Bible. And at about that time, the announcement came that Prince William was to wed, and he was to marry the lovely Catherine Middleton. Crazy Talk Animator's store then had someone selling the royal wedding set, which included 3 backgrounds, 2 grooms, a bride, and 3 bishops. I also was looking over old PDF files or HTML files of older Bibles to find certain things from my research, and I found audio Bibles of various different translations. I found the Coverdale Bible, the Tyndale Coverdale, which could count as basically either of those. I, of course, found the Geneva Bible. I even found the Wycliffe Bible, but no Bishop's Bible, which happened to be the one I was studying at the moment. and I felt that this was a rather sad fate. For the Bishop's Bible, while it was never beloved in its own time, is an important historical biblical translation. It is the immediate predecessor to the Authorized Version of today. The Authorized Version is also, and in America better known as, the King James Version of the Holy Bible in 1611. Indeed, the Authorized King James Version of the Holy Bible was intended to be nothing more than a revision of the Bishop's Bible. And to a large degree it is. They didn't simply scrap the Bishop's Bible, though they did reconsult the original Hebrew and Greek, as well as other translations. But a lot of the structure and terminology in the Bishop's Bible is retained in the Authorized Version. Though, to be fair, a lot of the Bishop's Bible structure and phrasing was preserved from the Great Bible, which was preserved from the Coverdale, but that is neither here nor there. The point is that the Bishop's Bible did have unique contributions that began with the Bishop's Bible, and that carried over into the Authorized Version, or the King James Version of today. Without the Bishop's Bible, there would be no King James Bible, which is the most famous and best read Protestant Bible throughout history in English. And it was one of the most influential biblical translations, quoted in literature and coining phrases that we still use to this day. And it is considered a literary masterpiece in its own right. And we wouldn't have it if not for the Bishop's Bible. And I always found that rather a historical injustice. So I set out to rectify that. And perchance, I happened to be doing this at the time that the royal wedding set was being sold. This was before the actual wedding, and they didn't know what William would wear. So the person who made this set created two grooms. One dressed in a sort of military-style dress uniform, and the other one a more contemporary suit and tie. Of course, it ended up that William did not choose either of those outfits to be what he wore when he wed. In fact, he wore a coat from the Irish Guard from Northern Ireland, and it is a traditional red coat with black highlights. So neither the naval-style dress uniform nor the more contemporary suit and tie were chosen. But this isn't so much an inaccuracy in the set as an incorrect guess, since the set did come out before the actual wedding happened. Nevertheless, the set also includes 3 actual sets. It includes the boulevard leading to the church exterior, specifically of Westminster Chapel, and the church interior. The set also came with 3 bishops. All of the characters had bulb heads, these blank heads, so that you could choose your own image to put on them. It would be, of course, presumed that the groom would have William's head. But it didn't come with William's head. So I decided to purchase this kit, and now I have it and want to use it. I have learned that there is no audio version of the Bishop's Bible of 1568. So I decided to animate a bishop reading it. And just for a bit of fun, I decided that the cartoon version of me I was using for commentaries would be the bishop. So the cartoon bishop you see in the Bishop's Bible is actually me. I'm not simply performing the character. I'm not simply reading the text and like a voice actor. That is a cartoon presentation of me. Very simple and very crude, but still me. I am accompanied by God the Father, whose face I took from a classical painting of God the Father. The painting looks too realistic for the cartoonish background and to accompany me. So I actually traced over it and created a cartoon image of it, more simple and blending in better with the cartoon version. And if you're wondering why God has glowing red eyes, the answer is very simple, though perhaps not what some might suspect. Some may suspect that perhaps God has glowing red eyes because he had glowing red eyes in the original painting I got him from. This isn't the case. In the painting, he had more normal-looking human eyes. So why does he have red eyes when I recreated him? Well, in order to create the cartoon version of God that I created, I took the original painting of God and put it into an art program, put an extra layer over it, and traced over it, careful enough to preserve the basic outline, but also aware that it has to be more simple and cartoonish. After I was done with the outline, I wanted to make certain that I could tell my version from what was underneath, so I matted it out in a single solid color. And since red was not actually present in the image I was using, I chose to make God's head red. But it wasn't just his eyes, it was his hair, his beard, his face. Everything was red. I then moved the image out and created my puppet version of God's head to use within Crazy Talk Animator. I then recolored him to make him look more natural. It's still cartoonish. There's no blending of colors that you would see in a real skin tone. There's no shading and what have you. It's very simple, but it is still more human in color. The hair is gray. There are alternate grays within the beard to make it look a little more realistic, but not too much so. And of course, his face is a skin tone color. You may say, well, that doesn't explain the eyes. But regrettably, it does. You see, one of the things I had trouble with, given the size of the image, was the irises and pupils. So I simply didn't trace those at first. I planned on putting them back in somehow. But I forgot to, leaving the eyes all one color. And I forgot to recolor them. So the reason God has glowing red eyes is simply a mistake on my part. But a mistake I didn't catch until I had already animated 3 chapters of the book of Genesis, and now it is simply part of the project. And I think a very nice part. I've grown rather fond of this unique version of God's head. I chose to use the Westminster Abbey exterior as well. This is because I plan on doing 3 sub-series, if you will, of the Bishop's Bible: the Old Testament, the Apocrypha, and the New Testament. For Catholics or Orthodox, I realize that the books that Protestants call Apocrypha are also known as the Deuterocanon and are considered part of the Old Testament. But this is a Protestant translation of the Bible, so I'm using the Protestant distinctions. After all, I have to honor the project. But it is my intention of using every asset in the royal wedding kit, including every scene. And since I have 3 scenes, it seemed also serendipitous because I can use one scene for the Old Testament, one scene for the Apocrypha, and one scene for the New Testament. And so I decided that for the Old Testament, I shall be using the external of the church, Westminster Abbey. For the New Testament, I would use the inside of the church. This way I am contrasting the two testaments. And as for the Apocrypha, considering this is an Anglican translation of the Bible that comes specifically from the Church of England and was once the authorized version for use within the Church of England, I am honoring their classification that the Apocrypha is retained and can be read for moral instruction or history or for provision and comfort. But it does not carry the weight of Scripture. So I have decided to allow the Apocrypha to be read within the Boulevard. This way, all three sets are used. And God the Father, the head that I created, is placed upon the groom that is dressed in a military uniform, replacing the bulb head. Thus I have used the military suit. All that remains now is the use of the bride, the use of the suit and tie, and a few other things. But I will be using them in the future. I just don't want to tell how yet. Partly because I haven't finalized any decisions on them, and partly because I do want to retain some surprises. But these elements that I'm bringing up now aren't too shocking. They're explanatory of things that you may already know. Because the Bishop's Bible Project, as I said, has a rather complex history. But this is where it began. It began with me noting a deficiency in that the Bishop's Bible has no audio book version. Me purchasing a royal wedding kit, me noticing that there were bishops, me being able to animate myself, and it sort of all just fell together. It seemed to work. So I tested it. I recorded the first chapter of the book of Genesis from the Bishop's Bible, and at that time I had no plans on animating it, but shortly after I decided to. So I created the cartoon version of me as a bishop, choosing one of the bishop models, and my own head that I had created. And I loaded the audio. And I decided it looked reasonable enough on its own, but before I rendered, I knew I needed accompaniment. I added God the Father. I added my own logo. And I loaded the audio file, and then I had Genesis chapter 1. And I decided to continue with Genesis chapter 2 and 3. And then I decided to animate the entire Bible. Because why not? This allows me to load it on video platforms. The animation didn't come out like I had wanted. I didn't quite work out how to make the bishop's motions look natural. So, even though the bishop moved some in earlier videos, me as bishop remains stationary for most of the videos, other than, of course, moving the mouth, and occasionally the head. Most of the action is taken up by God the Father, who moves in very erratic ways sometimes more subtly or more realistically. Originally, this was done accidentally. I didn't know what I was doing with animation, so God's motions came off as somewhat bizarre. But certain children liked it, and it has now become, amongst a very small circles of devotees, a popular aspect of the presentation, which I keep as simply part of the style. And it is my goal that each chapter of the Bible will look a little different. It'll have certain different elements added to it, or be shot from a different angle. Some will even have illustrations of the parts of the Bible that are being read. not all of them, and that will be woefully inconsistent. But there will be some of that. But having said all that, I also need to discuss the Great Bible Psalms, which are included in this project. If you've listened to the first part, introduction, or listened to the third one, you'll know why the Great Bible Psalms are in this project. But very briefly, I will cover it again. The Great Bible was the official Bible of the Church of England before the Bishop's Bible. And the Great Bible Psalms were written in a way that made them easy to sing within the church. And people had grown rather fond of them, as well as having memorized them. The Great Bible came out in 1539 and was a revision of Coverdale's Bible, which also had psalms that were very similar with very few changes. They were actually just a revision of Coverdale's. So people are already accustomed to singing the psalms in this certain way. And when the Bishop's Bible was produced, the psalms were clunkier, more mechanical. Some argue that they're more accurate in a translatorial fashion, that they are more accurate to the Hebrew they were written in. But they are clunky, and they're not very elegant. And people missed the Great Bible Psalms. So, even though a new batch of psalms was created for the Bishop's Bible, and when the Bishop's Bible was released, you had only the Bishop's Bible Psalms. In later printings, because of complaints and due to popular demand, they added the Great Bible Psalms alongside the Bishop's Bible Psalms. So for a while, you had both the Bishop's Bible Psalms and the Great Bible Psalms presented together within the Bishop's Bible. Later, in the later editions of the Bishop's Bible, when it was nearing its end of run, the original Bishop's Bible Psalms were removed entirely and simply replaced with the Great Bible Psalms. This is why, when I decided to do an audiobook of the Bishop's Bible and an animated series where I overlay that audiobook on top of it, if I were honest and sincere in wanting the entire Bishop's Bible read, I would have to include the Great Bible Psalms. But I didn't want to exclude the Bishop's Bible Psalms. So I decided that I'm simply going to read the Bishop's Bible from Genesis to Revelation exactly as it is laid out. But I would also read, separately from the main text, the Great Bible Psalms. The visuals would be different. Considering the Psalms are an Old Testament book, and I'm doing the Old Testament outside of a church, I inverted that and did the Great Bible Psalms inside of a church. But it's not the inside of Westminster Abbey from the Royal Wedding Kit. Rather, I acquired the Hilltop Church Kit, which comes with a church interior and 3 exteriors. And I decided to reverse the flow. Using the Hilltop Church set for the interior of the church, I stood my cartoon bishop without his mitre and usually without his cape, behind the altar where he reads the Psalms. God the Father is still accompanying him, but now no longer wearing that dress military uniform. In fact, he's not wearing any clothes at all, he's just a floating head. And the round disc with a bird in it is still there. This means that it is visually similar and obviously part of the same work or style, but it is still distinct. And the reason I did that is because I had a quandary. On the one hand, the Great Bible is its own translation, and the Great Bible Psalms are their own translation. And it's not like they just carried over into the Bishop's Bible. The Bishop's Bible did indeed have its own new translation of the Psalms. On the other hand, the Great Bible Psalms were integrated into the Bishop's Bible. Not from the first edition, but later. They were added. At first as a supplement to the Bishop's Bible Psalms, and then later as a replacement for them. And owing to that unique history, I kept that distinction alive within this project. And that is why the Great Bible Psalms are presented for the Bishop's Bible Project, and why they're presented the way they are. Having said all that, there is one last thing that I will explain. You will notice that there is another visual difference between the first 15 chapters of the book of Genesis and what comes after it, especially starting at chapter 19, with chapter 16, 17, and 18 being noticeably different in a way that's different from either of these other two. And you will also notice this starting at Psalm 51, 52, and 53. These are intentionally done differently. Because my house burned down in 2019, and I did no work on the Bishop's Bible Project for 5 years. I had to rebuild my finances and rebuild my life after that tragic event. And I won't go into it now. It's too personal. Not that I would mind going into personal details, but I only need to tell you what is necessary for the project. When I decided to revive the project, I had to set up the animation software, refamiliarize myself with it, and so on. But just like I wanted to honor the past by preserving the traditional pronunciations, and just like I wanted to preserve the past by including the Great Bible Psalms, I wanted to include the disruption in the project caused by the destruction of my house by fire. I had thought perhaps I could simply redesign the entire series, but I decided that would be too jarring. So what I decided to do instead was something that I had decided to do earlier, but since I had already made 3 videos, decided against it. And that was to create a mitre. This mitre has certain symbolic meaning that I will let the viewer figure out as the series progresses. But I already told you I was planning on using every element from the royal wedding kit. Well, I also told you that there were 3 bishops. Each bishop has a slightly different costume. They look very similar, but they're different in some ways. Two of them, for instance, have red facings while one has gold. And one of the ones has a red facing, has a darker red facing than the other one, and has some sort of plant on it. This cape is the cape that is visible in the first 15 chapters of the book of Genesis. My original plan was to do like I did with the sets, whereas I used the exterior of the church for the Old Testament, the boulevard for the Apocrypha, and the interior of the church for the New Testament. I would simply change which bishop's outfit I was in per testament. After my house burned down, and when I began 5 years later recreating the Bishop's Bible project, I decided to create a new mitre for the bishops. And I decided to reverse the order of the bishop's clothing he would wear. So the one he is in now, starting at Genesis chapter 19, is actually the bishop's robes that I was going to use for the New Testament. The Apocrypha remains the same. And the original Old Testament bishop's robes shall be used in the New Testament. Should I revisit the Bishop's Bible, as I want to do in the future, though I don't know if I can, and do a modern pronunciation version of it, I will go back to the original pattern. But for now, that was one of the visual cues. But it didn't feel strong enough, so while I didn't want to create a completely new break between the first 15 chapters and the later chapters, I did want to mark the moment when the fire destroyed most of what I had and derailed this project possibly forever. So, when I resumed work on Genesis chapter 16, I created them with a distinct style. They still draw upon Crazy Talk Animator. I wouldn't feel right if I had excluded it. But I used Desgo and created artificial intelligence image versions of my earlier work. I did so by taking videos from previous chapters of the book of Genesis, breaking them down frame by frame, and then running them through Desgo, having it create alternate versions. These alternate versions were then combined with other still images or other manipulations that I did, and I created a sort of slideshow version for the next 3 chapters. They mark the ending of the original Bishop's Bible project as it had been before my house burned down, and the birth of the new. And a similar mentality goes into the Psalms. By the time I had begun the project again, I had already read 50 Psalms from the Great Bible. So Psalm 51, 52, and 53 will have a visual cue that is different. But this time, I used things like Grok or NVIDIA to animate 5-second animated shorts, and also added a few still images from Desgo and other sources in order to create a visually distinct image that was still, nevertheless, in some ways, connected to the original, because I did the same thing. I took a psalm video and broke it down frame by frame and used a frame to create the motion. Those will hopefully be the only disruption in the normal pattern of how I present my videos. But they represent the break. And I hope they can be appreciated as markers of that break. It is now my hope that on the first Sunday of 2026, I shall release the first 3 chapters of the book of Genesis. And for 6 days a week, you will get 3 chapters of the Bible, for a total of 18 chapters a week. And on Saturdays, you will get 1 psalm, the great Bible psalms, with the exception of the first Saturday of the year, which actually happens before the first Sunday. But therein lies another unique property that I need to discuss. You see, when I began this project, I had yet to come up with a uniform way to introduce each video. And while it fell in place early on for the Bishop's Bible, so much so that really only the first 2 or 3 have any variations, and they can be more justified because it's a little more elaborate. For instance, in my Genesis chapter 1 video, I actually say that I am reading Genesis chapter 1 from the Bishop's Bible of 1568, when in other videos I simply give the book, like Genesis chapter 9 from the Bishop's Bible. When it came to the Great Bible Psalms, I originally said something along the lines of Psalm 1 from the Great Bible, and then that's it, because it was from the Great Bible. Or perhaps I would mention the Bishop's Bible, but for the first 12, I didn't really mention the Bishop's Bible in most of them at all, and it never came out the same way. So I decided to re-edit the first 12 videos, because starting in Psalm 13, and for all of them that I have recorded since, I always give the psalm number, say it's from the Great Bible, and say it is presented for the Bishop's Bible. And I wanted the first 12 to do that. And I had originally thought perhaps I should re-record the 12, and I decided against that. But then I decided perhaps I should just cut the introduction out and record a new introduction. But I decided not to do that either. I want to honor the history. I made a big deal about honoring the history through this entire project. So what I decided to do was to simply insert the missing part, and to do so without any effort to conceal that I'm doing this. So when you watch the Psalms, you will now see the original version of it up to a certain point, then a break, and a still image from one of the readings of the Great Bible Psalms was run through Desgo and created 12 alternate versions. Well, really 18, but I didn't use all of them. Or else I created some odd distortion of another scene, and I put it in there, and it would look rather clumsy. And I recorded on this very machine, which I'm about to replace, the presented for the Bishop's Bible part, and then it goes back to normal. The break is obvious, but it preserves the original recordings. And it turns out to be apropos, because the first 12 Psalms can now be presented together as a special early presentation in their unaltered, unedited form on the first Saturday of 2026. And then on the first Sunday of 2026, I can begin the project properly with Genesis chapter 1. I didn't want to begin the project with a reading of a psalm. I wanted to begin with Genesis chapter 1. And this allows me to do both. Genesis chapter 1 is still going to be read on the first Saturday. It's just going to be accompanied by Psalm 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And it will not be considered part of the project proper, but rather as a supplement. I will then begin the project proper on the first Sunday of 2026. You will get the first 3 chapters of Genesis. And by the end, on Friday, we will end on chapter 18 of Genesis. And on the second Saturday of 2026, you will get the edited Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 that I am using as the official form for this project. Of course, the project is very simple. I use QuasiTalk Animator, animation sets that I have purchased, some that I have created, and a few at this point that I've used AI to create art for. And then I personally read each chapter and set it to my whimsical animation. And I hope you enjoy it, even though it is an eclectic mix of a serious scholarly effort combined with whimsical, childish, almost irreverent animation. Some may think it irreverent. It isn't my intention to be irreverent, but it could look that way. Still, it is a plain, straight reading of the Bishop's Bible, combined with animation that I think is more fun to watch than just plainly hearing the text. Though you don't have to watch the animation, you can walk away from your computer and do some sort of errand or wash dishes or something else while listening to it in the background, and that's fine. The animation is only a supplement, but it is presented for your consideration, and I hope you enjoy it. I don't have much else to say, so I shall take my leave of you now. Thank you for listening. This has been the second introduction of the Bishop's Bible. We now proceed to the third, an installment on the history of the Bishop's Bible, and then we begin the project proper.